Hey everyone, here's my discussion on document design. You might want to take notes, but the video is always there for you to look at. The goal of document design is to help your audience understand the structure of your document, help your audience find information, help your audience understand information, help your audience remember information, and help your audience read information. Audience is key. It's very important that you design your document to help your audience understand your content so they can spend less time studying it. Good document design saves time and money, reduces legal problems because it's clear, builds goodwill, it reflects well on you and your organization, it looks inviting, friendly, and easy to read, enhances your credibility, it makes you look good, and it builds an image of you and your corporation as professional and competent. So what are we talking about with document design? Letters, memos, reports, PDFs for print, and similar things for screen with PowerPoint and web. Not going to focus on PowerPoint in this, we've had that discussion before perhaps, but certainly web design is a part of document design. Color. Some thoughts about color. The cost of using color online is free. Think about it. You design a website, you can use any colors you want, nobody charges you any extra. However, if you use color in print, prices go up. Imagine you print a 500-page textbook, black and white, it costs $10. But if you use two colors, say black and red, now it's $20. You use three colors, black, red, and green, it's $30. Use all CMYK colors, all four, it's $40. That's fine if you print 1,000 of them, it's $40,000. If you print 5,000 of them, it's $200,000. You get the idea. So printing in color can be expensive. So some design principles. These apply to online as well as print-based design. Proximity, alignment, repetition, and contrast. So when you look at documents, be they web pages or emails or reports or PDFs, some of the things you want to think in terms of are proximity, alignment, repetition, and contrast. And one of the things you want to consider in your undergraduate career is when you're taking a class and you're in class and you're being exposed to new ideas and whoever's teaching the class is throwing out terminology at you, and this applies to English or biology or chemistry or nursing, when you have assignments, use those same ideas in your assignments and feed them back to the teacher. Because even if you weren't really paying attention, it makes the teacher think you were paying attention and it reflects well in your assignment and generally helps your grades. That's any class. So proximity. Proximity groups related items. In our style sheet, and I'm going to use our style sheet a lot, we have lists. And lists are designed to group related items together. Visually, if you look at the page and you see a bulleted list, you know those items are grouped together, you know they're proximal. You know they belong together without even reading them because they're a list. Sub-bullets in a list or sub-steps in a list, those sub-items belong together. You can tell because they're close together. Graphics, if you're writing a user guide about Microsoft Word and you're discussing document properties, if you have a screenshot of document properties, put it in the user guide right where you're discussing document properties. Put the graphic in close proximity to the text it refers to. Don't make your reader go find all your graphics at the end of the book and then come back to the place in the book where they're referenced. Use proximity to help your audience. Tables. Tables are a kind of graphic, but tables group information, usually numerical data, statistics, and things like that. So proximity is one design element that helps your audience read what you're writing, read the content that you've created. Another way we deal with proximity in our style guide, as you may have noticed, is our heading ones, not any heading ones designed by Microsoft. Our heading ones have more space before them than after them. Why is this? It's because the heading 1 belongs to the text that follows it. The text that follows the heading 1 belongs to the heading 1. So we put less space between those two items to make them closer together, to put them more in proximity. There is more space before the heading 1 to distance it from the previous section or the previous topic. So, in the design of heading 1s for this class, white space has been used to create proximity by making the heading closer to the text it belongs to. Alignment is another way to show relationships to help your audience read your documents. Take a look at the table of contents you created. Notice top level table of contents items are aligned to the left. Subheading table of contents are indented a little bit. You'll notice the same things with our lists. The steps 1 list that you use for ordered lists in this class are aligned to the left, but sublists like steps 2 and steps 3 are indented. So the white space is a visual clue saying, hey, these are sub-steps, these are less important, and it shows the relationship of the sublist to the higher order list. We don't do it in this class, but in some style sheets you'll find that subheadings are indented. All our headings are left aligned, but in some style sheets a heading 2 might be indented a little further than a heading 1. And again, it's that white space that gives you a visual clue. Hey, stuff that's to the right is a little less important. It's a subtopic, it's a sublist, it's a sub-item. And again, graphics. Align the graphics appropriately with the content they belong to so you can see that relationship. Repetition is an important concept when it comes to designing things. And I don't mean repeat your content. Don't repeat the words you use. In technical writing, you want to be clear and concise, and you really want to say things just once. So don't repeat yourself. And at all costs, try and avoid telling your audience you're repeating yourself. By that, I mean you'll see a construction, quote, as I've said previously, comma, close quote. And when you're telling somebody, as I've said previously, you're saying, hey, I'm repeating myself to you. You've read this already. Why don't you waste a little time listening to my repetition? That is not the kind of repetition we're talking about here. We're talking about repetition or consistency of design. Be consistent, be repetitive in design. If I were to ask everybody in class, hey, what does blue and underline mean on a website? Most people would say it means a hyperlink. How do you know that? You know that because that blue underline technique has been repeatedly used and you've learned it. It's the same thing with our heading styles. Our heading 1 styles, our top level headings, are all a certain size. They all look the same. Anybody reading our document can say, oh, it's a new main section because it begins with a heading 1. Our bullets are all the same style. Our steps are all the same style. So be consistent in your application of styles. Be consistent in the way you create or design your document. So this is a repetition of structure, a repetition of organization to help your audience. For example, if you see big red letters in the document you're reading, perhaps that's a warning. Perhaps it says if you do this procedure incorrectly, you can hurt yourself. And whenever you see big red letters in that document, it's a warning. It's a notification that doing a procedure incorrectly can cause harm. That's an example of repetition of structure. Contrast is another way that you can help your audience read your document. And notice these concepts, these design concepts sort of overlap, because I could say bright red text comprising a warning is contrast. It's contrasting the black text to the rest of the document. So you're reading this online document and all of a sudden this bright red text that says if you install this knife in this machine incorrectly, it could break and you could become injured. It's bright red. That's contrasting to the black text around it. It helps you see it. Contrast could also mean a blue background on a certain piece of text. Several documents might use a blue background on a note text or on something that's an accessory text to the main documentation. So most of your documentation might be black text on a white background, and you might have like a blue box. You'll see this kind of thing used a lot in newsletters. Formatting of notes, cautions, and warnings. An idea about that. Warnings generally refer to procedures that, if done incorrectly, could cause physical harm to a person. Cut finger, bleeding, broken bones, loss of limb, loss of life. Cautions tend to refer to problems where data is lost or machinery is damaged. If you do this incorrectly, nobody's going to lose any blood, but you're going to lose all the files on the hard drive, or you're going to break this $500,000 machine. And then notes tend to be helpful hints. Print versus screen. Take a second and think about this. How are print and screen different? Well, if you think about printed paper and you think about the orientation of the paper, it's generally taller than it is wide. In the US, it's called US letter, which is 8.5 by 11 inches. In Europe, it's called A4. A4 letter size is slightly taller and slightly narrower than US letter. Online, however, you've got more of a landscape orientation where the width is wider than the height of the document, or the height of the screen. And when you're designing your document, you have to consider, is it going to be used in print or online or both? PDF is portable document format is an Adobe format designed for use online and in print both. So, if you have a PDF that is US letter and has page numbers, you can assume it's designed mostly for print and not to be read online. When was the last time you went to a web page and saw page numbers? The page numbers are irrelevant online. You can start the document anywhere you really want to, and 8.5 by 11 US letter portraits orientation requires a lot of scrolling, and people generally don't like to scroll online. However, if you see a PDF that has a landscape or a horizontal orientation, makes use of videos, hyperlinks, and things like that, then that PDF is set up for online use. Now you might see a mix where a PDF uses hyperlinks and also uses page numbers, and it's designed to both be printed and viewed online. Of course, the hyperlinks don't do you much good if you print it out. HTML, obviously designed to be viewed online, so you have to design your document appropriately with your margins and your page size. And consider in HTML not making people scroll. And we'll talk about chunking a little later, but when you're creating your content and chunking your content, you want to make sure for HTML, for your web pages, HTML is web pages, you want to make sure that your content fits on the screen, people don't have to scroll a whole lot, and if you've got a lot of information, you might want to break it down over a couple of web pages. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about PowerPoints here, but they are also a landscape or a wide orientation, and PowerPoints can use videos and hyperlinks as well, and PowerPoints are clearly for online presentation. It's pretty tedious work to read through a printed set of PowerPoints. They are much better suited for online delivery. So planning your needs. What are your company needs? For example, does your company need to use a document online, in print, or both? Your audience needs. Where is your audience going to use the document? For example, how many people in class have used documentation underwater? That's a question. I have. Let me explain a little further. How many people in class have snorkeled or scuba dove? So, I once went on a cruise to the Caribbean, and one of the things I got to do while I was on the cruise, I am a scuba diver, but one of the things I got to do on the cruise was go snorkeling on a reef and look at the fish. And before I went snorkeling on the reef to look at the fish, I was given a document that had a picture of the fish and told me what the fish's name was. That document was designed to go in the water, so guess what? It was plastic. So, decide your audience needs. Is this documentation to be used by firefighters in a fire? For example, firefighters take some complex equipment into fires, such as thermal imagers, heat cameras. Or they take gas meters into a fire. And perhaps if the gas meter reads 1750, the firefighter needs to know what 1750 is and needs to look that up on a table. Well, there's a lot of heat, a lot of smoke, a lot of water in a fire. So 20-pound copier paper, the stuff you have in your printer, probably doesn't work very well there. Also consider that given the low light conditions, the high stress conditions of the fire, the firefighter probably doesn't want to read through a 50-page document to find out what that number means. So probably what the firefighter needs is something like the scuba diver had. Right? Perhaps the firefighter needs a laminated document, single page, big print, that shows what the numbers on his gas meter mean, or what the key buttons are on his thermal imager. And then consider your available resources. How many people, how much time do you have, how much money do you have? For example, your company really wants to make a nicely polished user guide for Microsoft Word, but they don't have a lot of money. So if they print 5,000 and they cost $10 each in black and white, or they cost $40 each in CMYK color, and remember CMYK is ink, then maybe they just want to go with black and white and they don't want to use color. What kind of available resources do you have to write the documentation? Do you have enough people available to write all the topics in depth that you want to? Or do you want to scale it back and just write a brief overview given your resources? What are your audience needs? Are you writing this Microsoft Word document for somebody who will be programming Microsoft Word with Visual Basic for applications? Or are you writing this documentation for a secretary who's pretty much going to use spell check and save? So these are the things you need when you're planning your document design. Quick note about bindings. If you bought your textbook at school, you will have a flat, soft cover textbook with a flat binding that's called a perfect binding. think about the different kinds of binding you see. A spiral binding lets you fold the book back on itself and creates a small footprint, whereas a typical perfect binding with the flat side with the name of the book on the side that you might find, for example, in a paperback novel at an airport, when you open those books up, they take up twice as much space as a book with a wire spine that can be folded back on itself. Consider things like stapling, saddle stitching, three-ring binding. These kinds of binding limit how you can open the book, fold the book up back on itself. Some bindings where you're using folders cause pages to fall out, so think about the security of the bindings, but also think about the presentation of the binding. While a spiral binding might be very useful for a textbook in a workshop, where somebody's putting this thing on a desk next to a computer and a cup of coffee, so you want to limit the footprint of the document so you can fold it back on itself with a spiral binding, a perfect binding with its flat edge and the name of the book and the name of the author on the flat edge might present a more professional look and feel. So if you're thinking of a document designed for a marketing concept or for a sales concept, you might want to spend more on a binding and have a less useful binding than if you're talking about a binding for post-sales, for say training material or technical communication, where the sale's already been made and now you just need to help the customer use the product. Accessibility of documents. By accessibility, I mean helping your audience find content. Some of the things you see are tabs and dividers for documents, and tabs and dividers physically stick out from pages and let you know where sections begin. If you use these frequently, you'll notice they get torn and broken. They tend not to look good through multiple use. The other thing you can do is design icons and color into your document to help people find things. Tables, such as a table of contents and an index, to help people find content in your document. And then headers and footers. If you look for page numbers on your documents, notice odd pages are right-hand pages. Even pages are left-hand pages. Always. Flip through your book. Notice the page numbers are always at the outside edge of the page, so that if you flip through the book, you can see them easily. Imagine if the page number was in the center of the book, towards the spine. That would be less helpful because it would be harder to flip through the document and find a particular page number. So if you look at pages for books that are set up for printing on front and back, you will notice you have two different page designs. A right page design will have the page number on the right and it will be an odd number, and a left page design will have the page number on the left and it will be an even number. So you'll notice if you design a document and you're designing it to be printed on both sides, you're going to have to design two different pages, one for right-hand pages and one for left-hand pages. That being said, if all you're going to do is print this one-sided and staple it, then you can put the page number anywhere you want, and oftentimes people will put it right in the center at the bottom or top of the page. When designing paper pages, well, actually, white space applies to web pages too. Use white space for separation and emphasis. I mentioned earlier, headings in our class have more white space before them than after them. That puts the heading closer to the text that follows it. The text that follows a heading belongs to the heading, so the proximity of the text and the heading helps the reader make an association. So we're using white space to distance the heading from the previous text to which the heading does not belong. Use headings to group points and data. For example, a heading 1 describes a section, and that section continues until the next heading 1. And that section continues until the next heading 1. A heading 1 might have two subheadings in it, a heading 2 and another heading 2. The heading 2 defines a subsection. That subsection continues until the next heading 2, or the next heading 1. You try to use no more than two typefaces in your document. If you use a considerable number of typefaces, Arial, Times New Roman, Verdana, Comic Sans, Symbol, if you use way too many typefaces in your document, it becomes difficult to read. Traditionally, in North America, you're going to see a sans serif, that's S-A-N-S hyphen S-E-R-I-F, a sans serif heading font, and a serif, S-E-R-I-F, body font. That might be Arial or Helvetica for your heading. That might be Times or Times New Roman for your body. That's very traditional, very boring, but that's what you see. Try not to use more than a couple of typefaces because things become difficult to read. Use justification that's appropriate for your audience. Typically in my class it's just left aligned and ragged right, because left aligned, ragged right text is easier to read than centered text. Now some of you will try to use justified text. Justified text is where the left edge of the text and the right lines up and the right edge of the text all lines up. The trouble with justified text is you have to make it work correctly, is there have to be nuanced differences between letter spacing and sentence spacing that programs like Microsoft Word cannot handle. Programs like Adobe InDesign, typesetting programs, can deal with it, but Microsoft Word cannot. So for Microsoft Word users, left aligned, ragged right alignment is the easiest for your audience to read in general. Designing your page. Your page has margins. By margins, I mean the white space around the outside of the page. The white space around the outside of the page lets you focus on the black, the text that's in the center of the page. Another thing you want to consider with your margins is printers. Very few printers can print to the edge of the page. The reason for this is paper handling rollers need to operate in spaces where there's no ink. What happens is some printers will have a 1/4 inch margin required, some printers will have a 1/2 inch margin required, some printers will have a 3/8 inch margin required. To anticipate where your document's going to be printed, I recommend a minimum margin of a 1/2 inch all the way around your document, just so it will print off all the printers that are out there. If you set it to a 1/4 inch, there are some HP printers that won't be able to handle that. For example, some Canon printers that won't be able to handle that. So the margin is the white space around the outside edge of the document that lets your audience focus on the content. The gutter is for double-sided documents. So you open that novel you bought at the airport, or you open your textbook and you look in the center where the spine is, and you will see the pages fold in where they're attached to the binding. If there's text in that crease, it's difficult to read. So for long books, for lengthy books, designers add what's called a gutter. A gutter is simply a little more white space around the spine to push the text out of the spine so it's easier to read for perfect bound books that are large, so that the text doesn't disappear into where the pages are bound to the binding. This is all discussion about white space. Other things to talk about with regards to designing. I've mentioned chunking. Chunking is breaking information into manageable chunks, such as paragraphs. Identify chunks by section using headings, and by spacing, use of white space. So use white space to separate chunks of content. Use headings to separate chunks of content. For web pages, put a chunk of content on one web page and a different chunk of content on another web page, with the goal on a web page being to limit the amount of scrolling your audience has to do. Queuing. Queuing is visual distinctions between levels of importance. For example, in our style guides, in our styles for this class, heading 1s are bigger and bolder than heading 2s, which are bigger and bolder than heading 3s. This can also be contrast. This can also be filtering. Queuing also is represented in our class with lists. If you look at your top level bullets, your level 1 bullets, they're all the way to the left. Sub-bullets, bullet 2s, are indented a little bit. Sub-bullets, bullet 3s, are indented even more. And the visual distinctions between the levels of importance are shown by that extra white space, that extra indent, is queuing. Notes, cautions, and warnings will have maybe an exclamation point, or just a piece of string tied around a finger, or a smiley face, or some other graphic that shows that this is a warning, you might get hurt, this is a caution, data might get damaged, or this is a note, it's a helpful hint. And if you're repeatedly, consistently design your document to use a little graphic with your notes, a little graphic with your cautions, and a little graphic with your warnings, and those graphics are different, then that's an example of queuing. Filtering is using visual patterns to distinguish types of information. Perhaps you use bold for items that you click. In your user guide I said, hey, why don't use any apostrophes, don't use any quotes to identify things that you click. Use bold. So if you click File Save As, the words file and the word save as are bold. That's a visual pattern. Emphasis might be at the title of a book in the paper you're writing. Blue and underline is filtering because that means a hyperlink. But what if your hyperlinks aren't blue and underline? What if they're orange? Well, if you're consistent and repetitive about it, as we discussed earlier, be repetitive in your use of styles to help your audience. If you make your hyperlinks orange, within 15 or 30 seconds, your audience on your web page has figured out, if it's orange, I can click it. So, chunking, queuing, and filtering are also things to think about when you're designing your documents to help your reader. To create effective white space, use headings. More space before the heading, less space after the heading. To use proximity. Use a mix of paragraph lengths. Don't make all your sentences short. Don't make all your sentences long. Mix it up. Some short sentences, some long sentences. Create lists. Our styles for our class, this is already done. The bullets are designed to have various levels of indent depending on the level of the bullet. Numbered lists. You'll notice top level numbered lists in our class are aligned more to the left and they use a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The next level of sublist is indented a little more to the right. It uses A, B, C, D, E. And if you indent to a level 3 sub-bullet, you're using Roman numerals and it's indented even further. Using headings in this class. Don't use back-to-back headings. A heading introduces a section. So if you have a heading 1 called graphics, or about graphics, or using graphics, then have a paragraph that introduces the section before you have a heading or a subheading. So if you have a heading, always say something about the section before you have another heading or a subheading. When you're using headings, create a hierarchy. As I mentioned, in some styles, subheadings will be indented. In our styles, they are not. But in our styles, we use bold, we use size to format the headings to help people understand where the content is a new section, whether it's a subsection or a main section. Use word and styles so that you're not messing with fonts all the time. One of the reasons we use styles in our class is so that you don't have to worry about choosing font size or font type or italics or clicking the buttons to make it a bulleted list or a numbered list. All you have to worry about is writing content and then applying styles that are already defined. So you don't have to waste time messing with fonts. Using styles additionally helps create a corporate look and feel. You go to IBM, they have 100 departments. If they use the same styles, documents from all those departments look like they come from the same company. In our class we have 22 students. Hopefully by now we're all using our styles. So all the assignments, all the user guides that come from each of 22 students look like they come from one company. If you're all doing whatever you wanted for styles, those 22 user guides would look like they came from 22 companies. And in some cases 23. To design web pages. How many of you have been to a website by accident? You Google something and Google brings up a list of websites that Google thinks is related based on your search, and you click one and that's not the website you wanted. One of the things you can do is provide an introductory statement on your website on the first screen on the home page that says what the website is about. So if somebody gets there by accident, they don't have to waste time looking around. They can know immediately they're in the wrong place. Or alternatively, they can know immediately they're in the right place and then they can invest some time into looking at your website to get the information they need. Put interesting and useful information up front. Audience is very important. Try to anticipate the audience's needs and try to tell them what they want to know in the first paragraph if you can. On web pages, minimize the use of large complex graphics and animation. If you're going to use animation, I recommend you have it turned off by default and leave it up to the user to turn on the animation, to play the animation. The same thing goes with sound. I was at work, I don't know, a couple of years ago. I was working in a cube. There was a storm coming, so I went off the work that I was doing. I went to WFSB.com, which is Channel 3's webpage, to look for their weather report to see what the weather was going to do. I clicked on the weather page, and all of a sudden, my speakers were turned up, and a video was playing of the last weather forecast, and some weatherman was yelling loudly from my cube about the upcoming weather event. And so all my coworkers and my boss and everybody else immediately knew that I was not working on my project anymore. I was surfing the web for weather information. That's an example of why sound and videos should be turned off, and it should be left up to your customer to turn the sound of the video on, or to play the sound of the video. Minimize your use of large graphics because they take a while to load. I recommend using minimal graphics, and whenever you have graphics in a web document or a print document, make sure the text supports the graphic. Don't provide information in a graphic that is not present in the text. So you should use graphics to support your text, but anything that the graphic tells the audience should also be included and told to the audience in the text so they can read it. And one of the reasons for this is some people who go to web pages can't see very well. These people are using software called screen readers. And what screen readers do is they go through the web page and they read the web page to the audience. So the audience hears an audio transcription of the web page. Well, when this software gets to a graphic, the software will say, there's a graphic here. But because there's no text in the graphic, it's all pixels, the software cannot represent verbally to the audience what the graphic is showing. So, if you're using graphics, for several reasons, including the one I just said, make sure any information provided by the graphic is also included as text in your document, be it a web document or be it a print document. On each page of your website, make sure you provide a link to the home page. So that if somebody's 4 levels deep in your website and they're lost, you can get them back to the home page because that home page button is always there on every page. Design accessibility in terms of a table of contents, and index, and hyperlinks. A table of contents is just a list of headings in your document. So a table of contents will provide a list of sections in your document, because that's what headings are. They're section titles. An index is a list of key words in your document, or key concepts in your document, and that will help your user find what they need to. Unfortunately today, a lot of websites rely on search instead of an index, and that's lazy. That makes the user think about what they need to search for, and if you've ever looked on Google for something and found web pages that didn't answer your question or weren't related to your question, you'll understand that a search is not always an efficient way to find something. The advantage an index has is somebody has thought about how people are going to look for information and content, and they've created a list of the ways people are going to look for information and content. So when you go through an index and you find a term that you want to know about, you are certain that clicking that index entry or looking at the page number for that index entry will be rewarding, and you will find what you're looking for. If you click search in Google, you don't know that the top 3 or 4 responses are going to be on the subject you're looking for information about. And certainly design hyperlinks in your document to help people get to places. This is online documents. If you print out a PDF and there's a hyperlink in there, it's going to do you no good on paper. Online documentation has a sort of 3:2 format, 3 units wide for every 2 units high, such as this video is 800 by 600 pixels. A more standard design for websites these days is 1024 pixels across by 768 pixels deep. You have to consider what kind of screens people are going to be looking at your online documentation in. Colors free online, you want to consider using color consistently and repetitively to help your audience read your document. So if your hyperlinks are orange, then all your hyperlinks should be orange, and that should help your audience find what they're looking for. If your heading ones are blue, then all your heading ones should be blue, and that helps your audience see, just by scanning the page visually quickly, that there's 3 blue headings on this page, there's 3 sections on this page, there's 3 heading ones on this page. That helps them read your document. Typically, HTML is not for print. Websites are difficult to print. You can print from a browser, but print output can be unpredictable from a browser. So one of the things you want to do is provide a PDF if printing a document is important to you.